Hey, welcome to another video. So today we're going to be going into CROTA, the Son of Oryx. But before we begin, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, let's jump straight into it. So CROTA, Son of Oryx, also known as the God Knight or the Light Destroyer and the Eater of Hope, was an ancient and powerful hive prince who wielded the Sword of CROTA and killed countless guardians during the city's ill-fated campaign to reclaim the moon. CROTA is the main antagonist in The Dark Below, in which the Hive seek to awaken him to lead their armies against humanity. After Oryx fought his way out of the deep, after being trapped within by his sisters Savathun and Zivu-Arath, he decided that he needed children to carry on his lineage, and ensure his flow of tribute was always greater than that of his siblings. CROTA was then born, and his father explained to him why he had created him and granted him a sword and a name, stating those would be the only things that he gave his son, and that CROTA would have to earn his place upon his father's court, the High War. The newborn CROTA continued to listen as his father explained the trap of the traveler, and giving species hope that there was a path in the universe that did not involve conflict, and then gave CROTA the name the Eater of Hope, in anticipation of the lives and dreams he would snuff out. CROTA was then taken to be introduced to the rest of his family. CROTA was soon joined by two sisters, Ir-Halak and Ir-Anak, and a brother, Nokris. However, Nokris was excommunicated and stricken from the Hive's histories for his heretical necromantic practices. CROTA himself was made heir to his father and the Osmium throne. CROTA also had four sworn princes, Bannock, Dakur, Garok, and Marok, forged for him a great sword with which to ravage worlds and drain the light from his foes. At some point, the young CROTA would petition his father to forge him from the flesh of the worms a tablet of ruin to bear in battle, and tithed as tribute to him. Instead, Oryx coldly rebuked his son by setting the newly created tablet with Golgoroth, and explained only tithings of violence from him and his temples were demanded of him. One day, CROTA was approached by Oryx in order to watch his sisters as they experimented with the creation of an oversoul, a paracausal thanatosphere meant to hide their deaths and become harder to kill in the hope that he would learn cunning. However, as Oryx departed to observe the destruction of an alien fortress whirled by the Black Fleet, CROTA conspired to learn his sister's secrets of the oversoul, with which he shared his father's war priest. His aunt Savathun would influence the arrogant young prince to experiment himself with opening a wound into an open space. The space CROTA's sword cut into would open a rift into the Vex network, prompting the Vex to invade Oryx's throne world en masse, much to Savathun's trickery. CROTA engaged the Vex in battle, as they struggled to understand logic of his father's throne world, but they then manifested Kira, Blade Transform, who grasped the logic and became determined to master the Ascendant realm. The Vex teleported away from CROTA and slaughtered thousands of Hive throughout the dimension, granting them greater power. CROTA and his sisters fought the Vex and created new weapons to defeat them, but Kira fled to the other side of the wound created by CROTA and built gates to prevent him from closing it. After a century of stalemate, the war was ended when Oryx was summoned back by Ir. Although Oryx saved his throne world from the Vex and became intrigued by their fascination with geometry, he punished CROTA for his reckless experiment by exiling him from his court. Grabbing him by one of his legs, the Taken King flung his progeny into the Vex gate network and ordered him to return home covered in glory or not at all. For centuries, CROTA traversed the Vex's gate network and fought across space and time, becoming a demon in many cultures. As time passed, he adjusted his tactics as he gained a greater understanding of his father and ceased to spare some of his victims, whom he complained about his father to, and instead built mighty temples and monuments to himself to increase his power through tribute, strengthening himself and his father. Meanwhile, his father would also raise Thalnok, the fanatic of CROTA, as a proxy to observe his absent son after he found favor in the latter's attempts to mantle him. Over time, during his imposed exile, CROTA himself would be joined in his symphatic consort, Omnigul, the Will of CROTA, a zealous wizard who became the mother of his own devoted brood. The two of them together would raise CROTA's own court of disciples, including Sardon, the Fist of CROTA, and the Death Singer, Iriet. At one point, a then nameless Lokar had attempted to murder Omnigul to fuel her own tith. CROTA gave chase to the fleeing wizard, only for her to have escaped his wrath, frustrating the exiled Hive Prince. He went before Oryx and demanded his father kill Lokar for her impudence. Oryx was instead amused and impressed by the wizard's ability to evade his son, and raised her to his court, rebuking CROTA for his simplicity. CROTA also created a mighty ogre for his own design as a means to challenge the wizard Kegor, the World Render, which Omnigul claimed as her own personal summon. Among his greatest of CROTA's spawn was Hashladun, the eldest of 4 daughters, along with her sisters Bezereth, Keenox, and Voshar. Even as a young thrall, she came to CROTA's attention, as she was able to contend with knights in strength and size. Intrigued by Hashladun, CROTA ordered her inundated in the old way of floods to remove her excesses and leave her distilled down to her most powerful form through purification. Hashladun fought the forces CROTA sent against her, slaying them all. But CROTA himself then came for her, even more deeply impressed by her love for him, expressed by her strong display of will in defying him. Dragging his daughter to a floodplain in the Ascendant realm, he impaled her to its base in the 6 places and began the ritual of inundation. Hashladun survived the ritual and emerged weakened by the ritual, but stronger for it. Murdering the first living thing she encountered to regain her strength, CROTA came before her proud and impressed, but in sorrow informed her that in her newfound greatness she could not love him, as most of what had been his in her had washed away, and left behind only what was of her grandfather Oryx. With a cry of joy and grief, he cut a hole in his realm and cast her out of his court to join the ranks of his fathers. At some point in the collapse, CROTA and his spawn came to the Sol System, in his everlasting pursuit of the Traveler, and to wipe the last bastion of humanity it had protected. CROTA would also leave the Hive in conquering Luna, which held the pyramid of the disciple Nezarec buried beneath the surface since the Traveler's final attack. His spawn hollowed out the planetoid into a war moon, where they laid dormant until they launched their own invasion of Earth during the early City Age. In addition to Luna and the former disciple's pyramid, CROTA became interested in the space station's cockatus, which contained experimental gates from the golden age of humanity. He established his hold over these gates and created a manifold into his throne realm. From there, CROTA and his brood could commune with whispers echoed through the cockatus gates, learning to create the first weapon of sorrow. The Guardians barely repelled the Hive offense at the Battle of the Burning Lake, not realizing the true threat that the Hive posed. They launched a counterattack on the moon, which was later called the Great Disaster. The sword logic proved to be too much for the Guardians, as countless heroes fell before CROTA's blades. The God Knight himself would emerge from the abyss as he cracked Luna's surface with every stroke of his sword, and took the light of every Guardian life that it fell. Gunvor the Dawncaller would rally the remaining Titans from the First Pillar Order in a desperate charge against CROTA, sacrificing themselves to the Eater of Hope in a futile bid for time. Soon he would face the legendary Titan Wei Ning, overwhelming the striker with the paracausal might of the sword logic as he impaled her upon his cleaver. As a further show of dominance over his foes and their light, CROTA took the life of a Guardian using their own ghost, whose shell was hammered into a knife. His leadership and the power of his sword led to the Hive hordes to victory during the battle, slaying thousands of Guardians and driving them away from the moon for more than a century out of fear of CROTA's power. Despite this great victory for the Hive, CROTA's plans for further conquest of humanity were put on hold due to his father calling him back to the Ascendant Plane for their final victory together. Within the Sea of Screams, however, 2 knights, one of Oryx and one of Zevor-Arath, engaged in a duel of honor in their respective masters. The duel ended in a draw, but both flung themselves into the depths of an abyss, so the Knight of Oryx failed to make his tribute to a champion of CROTA. The setback cost CROTA's champion a significant tribute at the necessary time, and thus led to his defeat in a duel against the Sergeant of the God of War. Having suffered a major loss of temples and tributaries for his father, CROTA judged it best to sleep upon his throne world and recover his lost tiths while his soul remained tethered to the Ascendant Crystal, giving him a quick means to return to the real universe once his strength was restored. He would also entrust his own sword to the 4 Swarm Princes of the Hidden Swarm, to guard within the depths of the Hellmouth until his return to the physical world. Seeking revenge for the great disaster and the death of Wei Ning, Ariana III led 5 other guardians in an attempt to assassinate CROTA within his throne world, but the hordes of hive dwelling within the Hellmouth managed to overwhelm the fire team, picking them off one by one. Only one of the guardians, Eris Morn, survived, forever changed by her harrowing experiences trapped in the Hellmouth and obsessed with ending CROTA before he awoke. Decades later, CROTA's court began preparing for his return to the physical realm by invading the Cosmodrome on Earth, with his consort Omnigul leading the effort to raise the Hive army for a full-scale invasion of the city upon his return. Having foreseen the imminent return of CROTA, Eris called upon the aid of a newly risen Guardian to aid her in dismantling CROTA's army. The Guardian successfully assassinated CROTA's closest lieutenants, including the Swarm Princes and their commander, Sardon. As CROTA's resurrection draws near, Eris guides the Guardian to the moon, where the chamber housing CROTA's soul was located. The Guardian arrives in the midst of the summoning ritual, and works to disrupt it and slay the ritualist wizards. The crystal tethering CROTA's soul in the Chamber of Night would be sent back to the Ascendant realm, banishing his shadowing presence from the physical world, and thereby preventing his corporeal return. Afterwards, CROTA's horde was thrown into further disarray when the Guardians killed Omnigul in a strike operation, which prevents any further attempt to fully revive him. CROTA's end would be met by the Guardian leading a newly formed raid team upon the Oversoul throne, entering from the deepest pit of the Hellmouth. The Guardian summoned CROTA from his crystal to engage in his own throne world, surrounded by his army of Ascendant Hive. When conventional means failed before the Hope Eater, the Guardians turned CROTA's own sword logic against him with the cleavers of his broken blades, permanently killing him. CROTA's demise ultimately caught the attention of his father Oryx, the then God King of the Hive and Master of the Taken. Enraged by the death of his son, Oryx would bring his dreadnought into the solar system and lead an army of Hive and Taken in revenge against the Guardians. Ironically, CROTA's lingering ascendant power was necessary for the Guardians to access the Rupture Gateway into Oryx's sanctum. Returning to the Chamber of Night that tended to the crystal that housed CROTA's soul, the Guardians were able to gain a shard of the crystal, but it did not hold a piece of his soul. The Guardians now had to disrupt CROTA's death ceremony to gain a sliver of his soul. Entering CROTA's fortress, the Guardians narrowly slipped past the Hive defending his tomb, and were able to fill the shard with CROTA's death essence. With the Ascendant Shard, the Guardians were successfully able to enter Oryx's throne and defeat him. Like his son, Oryx would later fall to the Guardians who killed CROTA, when he was slain by them in his own throne world within the Ascendant Plane. CROTA's disowned, heretical, and forgotten brother Nokris would make his own stand against the Guardians, after arising from slumber in the icy depths of Mars' Hellas Basin with his master, the worm god Zal. The Herald of Zal sought to conquer the Red Planet for his god, but like his former family, Nokris would fall against the Warrior of Light. As CROTA was the first Hive god the Guardians ever faced and one of their most notorious foes, he haunts the Risen in their memories. Following the Scorn hunts and the continuous fight for the Dreaming City, CROTA's form would manifest as a nightmare blocking the Guardians' path to the derelict pyramid beneath the Scarlet Keep. The newly spawned nightmare of CROTA would prove too much for the Guardian to face, who took an essence from it before they were saved by Eris Morn. The Guardian would later face the CROTA nightmare again as they were coaxed into the interior of the pyramid, which they then succeeded in destroying. CROTA's immediate family would be survived by his daughters, Bezereth, Vosher, Keenox, and the eldest Hashladun. Atop the newly erected Scarlet Keep upon Luna in Sorrow's Harbor, the daughters laid plans for the Hive's future, and to achieve vengeance by creating a deathless champion under their control through heretical means. Hashladun and Bezereth would both be killed by Guardians, leaving Vosher and Keenox to complete their work while hiding out. Unfortunately for CROTA's line, both Vosher and Keenox, along with their own children, would be killed by Osiris, when Savathun lured the remnants of the Scarlet Court into one place to be destroyed in one fell swoop. The Witch Queen planned this in belief that the bloodline of Oryx had run its course. In his youth, CROTA was a great warrior, although extremely brash and arrogant. His father Oryx believed he lacked the cunning of his sisters, which led to CROTA being easily tricked by his aunt Savathun into opening a portal into the Vex realm. which taught the machines the sword logic and planted the seeds for the eventual taking of Kira, the blade transform. As the millennia wore on, CROTA gained more respect for his father and a greater understanding of the sword logic, increasing both their power through mighty temples of tribute. He exiled his brother Nokris, and remarked that he had a taste for glory. By the time of the Great Disaster, CROTA had reached the pinnacle of his strength, and could easily wipe out hundreds of light-empowered guardians, including Wei Ning, one of the last city's greatest champions. So what did you guys think of CROTA, the Son of Oryx? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.